Andrew Hastie, thanks for joining me. I want to get your thoughts first on Tim Blair's humorous article in the Daily Telegraph today, the heavy censoring. Is he exaggerating it? Is the Chinese misinformation campaign really that bad?
Good to be with you, Chris. I think Tim Blair's article today was incredibly humorous and funny, but more importantly than that, I think it was a textbook case of counter-subversion operation. It was really good. He essentially got state-sanctioned CCP talking points and did a judo throw and flipped them on their head and made us all laugh at the same time. So in a contest of ideas, authoritarian regimes versus liberal democracies, this is something we should be doing more, and we should look to Tim's example, I think, as a textbook standard for doing so.
That's a great way of looking at it, because these are deadly serious issues, and it is an authoritarian regime here. But just to sort of to mock it to its face, to expose to everyone how ludicrous some of their propaganda is.
Well, one of our great weaknesses, of course, as a democracy in these sorts of contests is that we can be exploited. Authoritarian regimes are very good at conducting clandestine operations. They can mobilise whole of society in the pursuit of their strategic objectives. We have limited government by nature of being a liberal democracy, and people value freedom. And so it's very hard to counter some of these things. So the best weapons that we have at our disposal are transparency and humour. And authoritarian leaders don't like being made fun of. And so Tim Blair's example is a good one, I think, in what we can do more of.
Now, you, of course, head up Parliament's Committee of Oversight over Intelligence Matters. What's your view on the extent of Chinese culpability for not sharing with the world quickly enough the information about the coronavirus outbreak, for initially suppressing and even condemning and prosecuting those who were blowing the whistle on this virus in Wuhan?
There are a lot of questions that need to be answered, Chris. And the West is pretty keen to ask them, because so far the global economy has taken a massive hit. We've seen a UK Prime Minister in intensive care. We've seen the USS Theodore Roosevelt, the US aircraft carrier tasked with patrolling the South China Sea, have to go into port and quarantine its crew. And just on Sunday we had the flagship of the French Navy, the Charles de Gaulle, an aircraft carrier with 1,700 souls on board, have to come off mission 11 days early as well for the same reason. So this has had a massive impact. The first thing we need to really know is how this thing started. Now, the CCP's official line is that it started in a Wuhan seafood wet market. But there's evidence now that suggests that may not have been the case, and I refer your watchers, or your viewers rather, to an article by Josh Rogan in the Washington Post today, where he talks about labs in Wuhan potentially being the source of the coronavirus.
Well, there's also some media coverage and examination that shows the Chinese have been eliminating or censoring certain phrases from communications into and out of China. One of those is about any laboratories, any viral laboratories in Wuhan.
Well, that's right. We've had people who've criticised the government in the medical field, journalists and elsewhere, disappeared or silenced. So there's been a big cover-up, and we need to know more about it. And unfortunately, the WHO has been running cover for the Chinese Communist Party on these questions.
We've had a look at the WHO, the World Health Organization, over many weeks on this program, the way they seem to have been kowtowing to China, eager to please Beijing rather than warn the world. Do you support Donald Trump's action now to freeze funding for that organisation?
Look, I think Donald Trump has made a decision in the interests of the US government and the US people. We are a sovereign nation. Each nation must act according to its own interests. So I support the Prime Minister's position today. We're a middle power, not a superpower. We're a trading nation. We pursue our own interests through multilateral organisations as well, and we need a strong WHO in the Asia-Pacific region particularly. So what I want to see is root and branch reform of the WHO. I'd like to see the current leadership moved on. They've demonstrated incompetence at a monumental scale in their handling of this pandemic. And I would also like to see the WHO not running cover for the CCP. I'd also like to see the Taiwan admitted to the WHO, and together we can work about work on, rather, reforming the WHO and making sure that it's fit for purpose with future crises like the present one.
Well, it's obvious the current head, Tedros Adhanom, has been an apologist for China. And of course, in this outbreak, they haven't criticised China for suppressing information early. They criticised bans, travel bans, that countries like Australia and the US imposed on China. And they were very, very late to even call it a pandemic, weeks after other countries had done so. So obviously his position is in strife. Will Australia officially lobby for Taiwan to be admitted to the WHO or readmitted to the WHO?
That's a good question. Not for me to answer. I'm a backbencher, but I know that the prevailing view of many of my colleagues on the backbench is that Taiwan should be admitted. They've handled the coronavirus very soundly. We can learn a lot of lessons from them, and so it would be foolish to exclude them any longer from the WHO. But let me say this, Chris. The only government that's going to act in the interest of the Australian people is the Morrison government, and that's what we did. The Prime Minister called this a pandemic long before the WHO. So whilst we value multilateral institutions and we do provide funding for them, at the end of the day, the Commonwealth of Australia is the best organisation to act in our interests, and I'm proud to say the Prime Minister did just that.
Well, just on that, when you're talking about Australia's long-term sovereignty, we're looking at a situation now of economic depression, recession at least, perhaps depression. We've got asset prices being pushed down because of that in Australia. And of course, there is a level of culpability here from China. Should we be extra vigilant at the moment when it comes to Chinese foreign investment looking to buy Australian assets at depressed prices?
Yes, we should, Chris. And that's why the government, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, announced a fortnight or so ago changes to FIRB, dropping the threshold to $0 for any investment over the next 6 months. And this is a step in the right direction. It's not a long-term fix. We need to revisit the rules around foreign investment. Of course, we've always welcomed foreign investment insofar as it suits the Australian interests. Of course, our wool industry, which kept our economy going for about 140 years, was built off foreign investment. So we're not going to say no to foreign investment, but certainly we don't want predatory behaviour snapping up distressed Australian businesses and assets. And so it's all about securing the perimeter right now during a period of great vulnerability and ensuring that our sovereignty and our national interest is protected. And that's what the government has done.
Just finally on that, it's a big question. You can't answer it in one go, I suppose. But post-pandemic, how do we make our economy less reliant on China?
I think we need to really assess what our strategic strengths are economically and what our vulnerabilities are. And then we need to make changes to protect our vulnerabilities and enhance our strengths. For example, we could be an energy superpower. We could have the lowest prices in the world. We could kickstart manufacturing in areas that we're very vulnerable. And so we need to have a discussion that's not reflexive, that's not nostalgic, that's realistic, and ultimately serves the economic and strategic interests of this country. So we need to identify those strengths and those vulnerabilities and then work together as state and federal governments, indeed local governments, to incentivise investment in those areas. And together we can come out of this much, much stronger.
Andrew Hastie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Chris.